Congratulations! You solved the mysteries, puzzles, and clues in order to find this secret, unlisted devlog. And welcome back to Devlog. In the last one, and in this part, I work on moving platforms. The way moving platforms work in themselves is incredibly easy. This being looping, ping pong, finishing, or finishing at the end of their route. Each of these will have a different mode of movement based on how they will actually move between pivot points, but essentially, moving platform move to pivot point. I create child objects in each moving platform. I tell the moving platform which order to move between these, and then depending on which type it is, depends on how the platform will move. For example, if I have points 1, 2, and 3, in the looping setup, it will move from point 1 to point 2 to point 3, then back to point 1, back to point 2, back to point 3 in a loop. In a ping pong setup, we will go 1, 2, 3, 2, 1, 2, 3, 2, 1, back and forth. In a finish setup, we will go 1, 2, 3, and then stop moving. And in a finish looping, we will go 1, 2, 3, back to 1, and then we will stop moving. In terms of actually moving these, this is incredibly easy. We just move from one point to another based on how much speed we want to move from each point. So each point information will have an amount of speed we want to move to this point for, and then depending on the distance of the point, we will lerp a value from 0 to 1 based on the speed, based on the distance between each point, and how fast the objects will move towards that point. We will also save information for how much this object will rotate towards each of these new points. So this is just based on the transformation rotation of each of these pivots. Is the easiest way for me to program it and also design a moving platform to be able to rotate over time. As we move to each individual pivot, we will also move to the pivot's rotational value. This means I can just use the lerp value that is calculated to also rotate the moving object as it moves to its new point. So it will rotate from its original transformation rotation of the initial point to the transformation rotation of the second point as it moves from one point to another. And this is all very easy and very simple. The complicated aspect of moving platforms is making it so that the player will actually stick to moving platforms, calculate momentum based on moving platforms, rotate through moving platforms, have velocity added to the player once they leave a moving platform, be squished by moving platforms. Another third thing that I've forgotten about. The point is, moving platforms are easy. Having the player touch a moving platform makes it infinitely more complicated. The first thing I have to do, just in general for a moving platform setup with the player, is have a value calculator for the velocity of a moving platform. This is also imperative for future devlog updates where I calculate if the player can be squished into a small little pancake by a moving platform. But that's in a future devlog, so don't worry about it. The point is, I need a way to calculate the velocity of a moving platform. Since there isn't actually any velocity added to them, there is no rigid body, there's no actual physics, it's just a lerp function, I need to calculate what the moving object's velocity will be based on its movement from point A to point B and based on its rotational value. The way I do this is checking the direction from the transform moving platform's origin point to its next point it needs to move to, how much speed it is moving from point A to point B to, and then the moving platform's rotational value. The reason I have to calculate the rotational value of an object is, for example, let's say the player is stood on an object that is moving from left to right, but the object is rotating very rapidly counterclockwise. The object is rotating counterclockwise very rapidly. This means that the player was to be set on this object and then jump off it. They would have velocity moving from left to right based on the speed of the object, but also a counter velocity because they had been stood on an object that was rotating in the opposite direction of left to right. This means the player would have to have a velocity based on both of these two forces together. Or the player is stood on an object that's rotating very quickly but isn't moving very much. Basically, the player needs to have a calculation for each of these velocity factors just so both can be taken into account when moving the player. For calculating rotation, all I have to do is check the difference from rotation A from rotation B, this being the amount we're going to rotate between two values, how fast we're going to rotate into these two values, and how intense the rotation is. And then find out the direction of rotation. Clockwise or counterclockwise. Clockwise would send us right, counterclockwise would send us left, based on our position on the object. But don't worry about that. And then I just add this to the irregular velocity to calculate the velocity that is going to be acted on the player. It's relatively quite simple, but every single time I'm met with a situation where I have to calculate rotational values, I don't like it very much, because I'm not very good at these things and I keep muddling things up. Quite a big difficulty with this system was just finding if the value was rotating clockwise and counterclockwise, and I know this may sound like a very simple thing, but it took me a long time because I kept making basic errors. But the system works now and will be involved in 0.2 levels, so hooray! The next thing we have to do is handle how the player will interact and set onto the movement of a moving platform. This is really easy. All I have to do is have a floor information object which contains the information for the current floor that we are on. Then, whenever the player hits a floor, moves onto a different floor, sets onto the wall of an object or the ledge of an object, any state where the player would be interacting with the floor, will be childed to this object, so we're going to be copying all of its movements. This is the basic, simple little baby way to make the player move with a moving object. Just make them a child of it. We will only do this if the object actually is moving or has the potential to move, so we're not going to be unnecessarily parenting the child to any object. Then when the player is not stood on this object, we will be not parented to the object. That's pretty much it. Then when the player exits this object, either by jumping off it or falling off it, we will give them velocity based on the object's movement. So if we're running towards the right, or if we're on an object that's moving towards the right, and we jump upwards, we'll have the momentum of this platform, so we could theoretically jump while on a moving platform and land perfectly easily back onto the platform. The same with rotation. If we're stood on something that's rotating rapidly, we will be flung off it based on the rotational value, based on the velocity amount that is given to the player. It's very simple. Next, we have more complexities for how moving platforms work, specifically setting up what the platform is and when it should move. The first scripting is the moving object enabler. This will enable or disable the moving object scripting, as in an object that would only move when the player is touching it. And this is very simple. We just check if the object has collided with the player. If it has, we'll check if the player is in a state that would enable this object to move. For example, if the player is in mid-air and touches the bottom of the platform, it's not going to be moving, but if the player has landed on the platform, we're going to be activating the platform. The same with the player being on the wall of the platform. If they're sliding down the platform, then they would also be moving on the platform. We'll also need to check that the platform the player is moving on is this object. For example, if the player is sliding on this platform, on the left of the platform, and it brushes against another moving platform as the player is sliding down it, we won't enable the other platform because we are sliding on a wall, but that's not the wall that we are currently using. Basically, turn on, turn off objects. We will then check if the object is already moving, so we won't re-enable it multiple times. We will then check if the object will ever stop. If the object never stops, we can just remove this script because it will never be needed again. But if the object can stop, we will keep the script around in case the object stops and we touch it again. The only issue with player movement when on a moving object is pulling up onto the moving object with the ledge movement scripting. The way this worked before is that I would define 2 points in space with a vector 2 and had the player move from one point to the other based on the ledge movement scripting. This no longer works if we are on a moving object. Because the object is moving, as we are on it, we will then have to change what these points are as the object is moving. One method for this is just editing these points every frame so that they are adjusted to where the object is moving to, but that would be needlessly pointless, very complicated, and kind of stupid. So what I do now is I make 2 empty transform objects, so when we are pulling up to a ledge, these will then move with the object they are parented to, which is the ledge. If we have a ledge, we will then pull up to the ledge and delete these. These are just a reference in space to make the ledge movement a lot easier if we are on a moving object. Finally, we have visual effects. Certain effects can play, or certain animations can play, at certain points of the moving object's movement scripting, based on whatever point we have just met or reached in our movement object scripting list of points to reach. If reached points, play animation string name, if an animation string name exists. An object effect, make one of those, if the object has hit an object or a point. This is all very simple. I just like little visual effects for the object actually moving things. If an object was moving very quickly and hits a wall, I would want a little smoke effect to happen. We also have a visual of the object moving to give the impression of it actually having some weight behind it. For this current setup of an object, which I don't know what tile set is going to fit in with, it has gears and pipage. The outer rim is a pipe texture I made. The inner side is some gears that animate. If you look at this, you get the illusion of funny moving pipe. Furthermore, we'll also enable a looping audio scripting for these specific moving objects as they are moving to make them sound like they are moving. This is just ambient looping pipe and mechanical moving objects that is really just there for ambience. And the last most important point of all is that this devlog is over. Bye! I, like usual, had fun making this scripting. It's very simple, very easy to set up, and is pretty much just derived on how I program where objects would move to. These obviously move in a very basic way, and this is just up to the discerning eye of the game designer to place these in a way that actually looks good and feels good in levels, and set up any relative visual information. If only I had a good game designer on this team to make the game look good. Unfortunately, I just have myself. I am happy I added these to the game. Moving platforms are a useful, but easy to add system for any game design or any game level. I don't really foresee using these extensively large amounts, but they're useful to have as a script to add to any level I want to. Now I have the opportunity to make a bunch of levels, just like Chapter 1 of Celeste. Anyway, get out!